All right. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Monica Beta, the Executive Director of the North Central New Mexico Economic Development District. And as you all know who are attending, we represent 7 counties in North Central New Mexico: Santa Fe, Los Alamos, Taos, Rio Arriba, San Miguel, Mora, and Colfax counties. And we also work with some of the rural communities in Sandoval County as well. This morning, I wanted to first introduce our staff, Felicity Fonseca, our Community Development Director, who put this training together. Thank you, Felicity. And then also Michelle Jaschke from Legislative Council Service, who has been so kind to do this training for us right after the holidays, right before the session. I'm sure she's got a million things going on. So thank you, Michelle, for being with us here today. Really appreciate
You're
you.
welcome.
We know a lot of people just got back from the holidays, so we are recording this. We will post it on our website, though there will be a lot of people who can't be here this morning. And I just wanted to, ask everyone to sign in on the chat so we have a record of who's attending. We do have, I think, a wide range of entities attending this morning, including county and municipal governments, hopefully tribal governments, also nonprofit organizations and educational institutions. So I think Michelle is going to touch on all of those aspects. I did also invite our area legislators to jump on the call if they have a few minutes. I heard from a few of them that they couldn't make it, but sometimes it's nice if they get on and talk to us a little bit about the process and what to expect this year. So if I see any legislators jump on the call, I'm going to go ahead and just break in and introduce them, as they might need to get onto an additional meeting. So I think what we're going to do today is turn it over to Michelle for the training. She's going to walk us through an overview of the whole capital outlay process, and then specifically the form that needs to be filled out by December 13th, correct, Michelle? Which is right
January 12th.
Oh, January 12th.
Okay, I keep doing that too.
Okay, January 12th, 2023. So that's right around the corner. And then we can talk about some of the finer points of the form. And also we have, I think, a pretty small group, so we can open it up to Q&A and see what questions everybody has. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Michelle.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Michelle Jaschke, I coordinate the Capital Outlay Division for the Legislative Council Service. I'm always happy to have a chance to explain this process to folks because it has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pull up my PowerPoint presentation. Is that showing up on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You can see it.
I know we all know we're talking about bricks and mortar projects and public works projects, but I do like to just describe what we use as definition for a capital outlay project. And I am here this morning to give you the broad overview of all of this, what changes we've made this year, how the capital outlay project request process will work online and through our office. And just starting with this definition that we use of capital outlay project and how it relates to the funding sources that we usually have available for capital outlay. So we use this definition that comes from the Property Control Act that states that capital outlay project is the acquisition, alteration, improvement, or reconstruction of an asset that's intended to be held over the long term. And so I think that's in part because severance tax bonds have been the mainstay, or proceeds from severance tax bonds are the mainstay of capital project funding in New Mexico. And there are a lot of restrictions that the state and the IRS place on the use of those proceeds, including that you must have that tangible asset, as the Property Control Act states, at the end of your project period. There are also, we also use general fund money sometimes for capital projects. Usually when general fund money is available, it's targeted to larger statewide projects, just because there's usually not a whole lot of it. This year, apparently, the general fund reserve is so high that some of that money may well wind up in the capital bill. Every other year, we produce a general obligation bond bill, and that includes the ballot initiatives that go to the voters in the fall, requesting funding for capital projects and acquisitions for higher education, senior centers, and libraries. So you saw those on the ballot this last year. This is not a general obligation bond bill year. So the act goes on to state that anything that's integral to the development of that asset, planning, design, construction, the purchase of land, all of those things can be considered part of that capital outlay project. However, you can't just do standalone planning with this fund, with these funds, because you won't have a tangible asset at the end of it. It's not considered a tangible asset, that master plan or whatever you're working on. We do get requests for those, and they're, there's such a valuable part of what should happen with the capital project. But that you really can't use anything that's going into the capital bill, basically, no matter the funding source, should result in that tangible asset at the end of that. So projects that have been submitted online that have been sponsored by a legislator and introduced can be considered for funding. So the deadline to submit those projects online is this coming, well, not this, 3 o'clock on Thursday, January 12th. So next Thursday. And the website has been open for a while. And so we have, as I mentioned, we've already collected quite a number of requests. We compile these requests, and then we give them to both the legislators and the governor. And so this is a huge list that comes out at that point, and we can try to narrow that list for legislators to the counties in their district. The governor does like to see everything that comes in. But what we're suggesting, and it has been difficult these last couple of years with the Capitol closed completely in 2021, and then partially closed last year. But and many of you will remember that, or some of you will remember that in the past we had a process that was entirely paper-based. Just 3 years ago, people would write up their capital project, they would bring it to the roundhouse, they would get a legislator to sign off on it, and then they would bring it to us. And we had this process where we would stamp things in, and then we would try to put everything into the database. But we really didn't have the capacity to enter all of that information into the database that way. So we had two crews, a day crew and a night crew of bill clerks, and they would come in periodically, day and night, and file all this paperwork away. So we could go into these massive files that we have and find a piece of information, but it was just that it was kind of an isolated piece of information that you couldn't really compare to anything, or you could, but it was much more difficult. So now establishing this pre-session deadline, which we did last year, we're continuing that this year, and it allows us to collect all of this information, compile it, and get it to legislators earlier than we have in the past. And this has been a struggle the last couple of years to get that to them in a timely way, because we still had the sponsorship need, and we were trying to give this information to legislators as we went along. But this time they will get all of that information early on. We are asking them to submit that their sponsored projects list. They will get that list in 2 forms. One will be the traditional report form that we've used before that just lists projects by county, and they can look at that and look at their county and select those. And or we are producing a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet will go to their legislative aides and to the legislators. But the legislative aides will be trained in how to plug in the information. It's basically just plugging in a sponsor code next to those projects that legislator has chosen to sponsor. So what you can do once you've completed your form, when you put all that information into the request form, it generates a project summary sheet, and that includes a snapshot of what your project is about. And this sheet doesn't require a signature, but it's something that you can use to inform legislators and the governor about your project. I'm going to demonstrate the search function that we have on the capital project request site when we go to look at the form, because you can look at submitted projects. You can search for, you can pull your project back up if you have to. If something happens and we have to do this remotely again, then legislators can look at that project summary sheet online and still see what you're talking about there. I wanted to show you this. I just think this is interesting, what has happened with capital project funding over the last 10 years. This bottom green, this kind of sage green, represents severance tax bond proceeds. This lighter green, yellow color represents general fund money. And then the sepia color at the top is represents other state funds. So usually, there may be some other something from the public school capital outlay fund or something like that that goes into the bill. But all of these years represent regular session years except for 2015. In 2015, there was no agreement on a capital bill, so that bill was passed in June of that year. And then shortly after that, the state experienced a solvency crisis. So what this chart doesn't reflect is special sessions. There were 2 or 3 special sessions in 2016. So this drop off would be much steeper because capital projects were swept and swapped for general fund projects. And then in 2017, of course, there was no funding at all for local capital projects. And then by 2019, we rebounded to this $1 billion capital bill, which unfortunately was followed immediately by the pandemic year. And so this slope would be much gentler if we had not taken, a lot of money was taken out of that capital bill in 2020 at the last minute, just because of the uncertainty of the times. But you can see how much more money has gone into these capital projects over the last 4 years. And this in 2019 is notable not just for how much money is there, and that it was general fund money, but these projects, if they were 4-year construction projects, will be reverting in 2023. So that's something to look at if you have projects from there. And then, of course, because of the all the supply chain issues and lack of contractors and everything that the pandemic created, there may well be a need to extend the time for some of those projects. This shows this bottom line shows the number of capital projects that were actually funded. This middle line shows the number of projects that we processed. And then this top line shows the number of times that these processed projects were sponsored. So you can see that things have gone a little haywire without the direct connection that we have had in the past with people being able to describe their project directly to legislators. The tentative timeline for legislators and the governor to receive this list of capital projects is January 23rd. And actually, that's a fairly set date. We will have that information to them. And then we're asking them to return their sponsored projects list by February 2nd. So that's a considerable amount of time in there to talk to them, to get them your project summary sheet and share information with them. And you can do that with your project summary sheet or just talking to them. And it is sometimes difficult to get a hold of all those legislators, but their legislative aides can be helpful in that regard if you make contact with them and let them know what your project is about. So then once we collect all those sponsorship lists, we will post the sponsored projects at that point by agency and by county. There's no legislative sponsorship attached to those at that time, and those will be posted on February 6th. And then legislators will approve their final sponsored project list, and we use that to prepare their official capital outlay request, the certificate that goes to the floor of the House or the Senate for introduction on February 16th. That next day, on February 17th, we post those CORs online, and then you can see which legislator sponsored your projects. Of course, at that point, there's no funding attached. So they're when they sponsor those projects, it just shows the total amount that you have requested this year. So that funding part comes during the second half of the session. But we do encourage you at this point, once those sponsored projects go up, to look at the language for your project, and just for accuracy and make sure we have the details correct. We're processing a ton of information, and we really need to make any changes that are necessary before this goes into the bill, because once it gets rolled into the bill, there's very little time left in the session, and not a lot of time to make any changes, and almost impossible to amend the capital bill, because it has to cross up through both chambers, and there's just very little time for it to go back for any kind of consensus. So these projects that have been submitted online, sponsored by legislators and introduced, are eligible for this project funding. Legislators will receive their funding sheet, and they will also receive guidelines for project funding. And those are things that the legislature has looked at over time, and focusing on life, health, safety issues, making sure that the project can be fully funded, or that phase of the project can be fully funded. And then they get a deadline, or they get the amount of money that will be available to them, and they get a deadline for submitting their funding requests. And that usually is just a 24-hour turnaround time. It's very quick. And so if you're talking to them about funding, you need to really kind of do that in advance. And once those sponsored projects come out, if there's a project you have that didn't get sponsored that you really need, you might go back to a legislator and ask for that. But at that point, it's probably better to move on and start talking to them about funding and trying to get together, trying to get a whatever your legislative delegation is going to put into that funding, and then consider talking to the governor about those projects. And I do not speak for the governor in any way, shape, or form, but I have observed over the last few years how she approaches this. And one thing to know about the funding is how they derive that amount. So, usually we're talking about severance tax bond proceeds, and there's a group, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. They look at the inflow to the Severance Tax Permanent Fund over the last 5 years, consider that with, another number of other market issues, and come up with a capacity for capital outlay projects. And that capacity basically reflects what they feel they'll be able to pay back as debt service on those bonds if the bonds are issued. And so then a number of things come off the top. A number of things are in statute that come off the top of that, whatever that capacity is, including the Water Project Fund, the Public School Capital Outlay Fund, Tribal Infrastructure Fund, and the Colonius Infrastructure Fund. So once those set-asides have been made, then legislators and the governor agree on a certain amount that will go towards statewide projects. And so that's a big negotiation about, how much money will be dedicated toward that, and which projects those statewide projects will include. Once that set aside has been made, then the balance is generally divided 3 ways between the House, the Senate, and the governor. So representatives get more representatives as they get a little bit less money. Right now, the House and the Senate divide their appropriations equally among their members. So representatives a little bit less, senators a little bit more, and then the governor has that whole amount to spend. And so say each of those groups gets $250 million, then the governor's trying to spend $250 million basically overnight. And so she does need information from you all about your projects, but she's also not going to fund, or, you know, it's been, and I don't, again, don't speak for the governor, but I can see that in the past, she has not funded smaller projects. If you have a $5 million project and you get your legislators to do $500,000 to $1 million, then you might go ask the governor for the other $4 million and match it up that way. And it is hard to know, and it is very hard for legislators to know exactly what amount they're going to be able to put into these things. So if you're talking to legislators, maybe you just want to let them know, well, I talked to Representative X, I talked to Senator Y, and then when they get together, they can kind of sort out the funding for that project. Those funded projects are then incorporated into the capital bill, and that goes to the in one of the committee hearings, and then the bill moves on. The governor does have that 20-day post-session period to veto project, or to sign the bill and veto projects if she chooses to veto projects. And then we post a list of all the projects that were included in the bill, the vetoed projects. And since 2021, we also post a publication online, and this came out of legislation that was passed during the session in 2021. And it shows all of the projects, it shows all of the funding sponsors, how much money they included for each project, or how much they appropriated for each project. It also shows the governor's appropriations and any vetoes that were made of those projects. So to submit your request, and I am going to show you the form here in a minute, but I just want to go over a few of these things very quickly. So if you have an ICIP number for your project, you can enter that 5-digit ICIP number and then click there's a little tab there that says import ICIP data, and that will populate a lot of the form for you. There are a few fields that will not be populated, and you will need to complete those and make sure that you do. One thing that happens is you get down to the budget information, and there's a little tab that says calculate totals, and that excuse me, that tab won't function if you haven't filled in all the required fields up above there. But when you're pulling in this budget information, so the information that comes in from the ICIP may be budgeted over 5 years. It is a 5-year plan. So you may, it will pull in all 5 years of that information, which is a good thing, because then you get your total project cost, which may well be higher than the amount that you're requesting this time. If you're just looking at funding a phase of the project, then your total project cost reflected in that budget breakdown could well be higher than that. If you don't have an ICIP number, just go to item number 2 and start there. Once you start entering that information and choose a fiscal agent, many things will default from that fiscal agent field. So a lot of that will be completed for you anyway. And make sure that you do provide some current project contact information if you don't have an ICIP, or even if you do have an ICIP, just to be sure that the DFA can get back to you, and the Board of Finance, when they send out their questionnaires. You want to make sure that everybody can get in touch with you that way. After you reviewed your information, it is important to take a look back at the information you've provided in the form before you click that submit button, because otherwise you may wind up submitting multiple or duplicate requests. We might have to delete some of them, figure out which one works. But once you do submit your request, your project summary sheet will show on the screen. So you'll know that that project has been submitted. And then you can go back and search for it. You can print it out from there, and it is stored there. So you can go back, and I'll show you that search function in a minute. The fiscal agent, there are a couple of things about the fiscal agent field. This will autofill if you have ICIP data. If not, you can select it from the drop-down menu. We have been working the last couple of years as we move this all online to align our tables with those of the Department of Finance and Administration so that they can get the money out sooner, so that we're all on the same page about the eligible entities. But there are some complications with that, because what we're putting in the bill is really that legal name of that entity, and it doesn't always correspond to what the DFA has. So, the upshot of that is that you may be eligible, but maybe we haven't activated your entity in that table if you haven't submitted a project for a while, or if you've never submitted a project. So if you find that you're not in that drop down as a fiscal agent, then just call us and we can find that listing in the table. If you're not in the table, it's a very quick process, or maybe not a quick process, but it's a pretty simple process to talk to the Department of Finance and Administration and get an entity code. But that is something that if you're, since our deadline is approaching, that's something that you might want to think about doing now, just checking to see if your entity is listed, and if you did need to talk to the Department of Finance and Administration and get them to assign you an entity code. Of course, I always mention the anti-donation clause here. The state is constitutionally prohibited from making direct donations to private organizations. However, some local governments will agree to serve as the fiscal agent for another organization that's providing needed services in their area. If that capital asset that you're developing will be leased to or operated by another organization, then we ask that the fiscal agent for that project provide documentation regarding ownership of the asset and maintenance of that asset. And the documentation requirements that we have for those projects are posted online on the legislature's website on the capital page, and you can look those up. And there's a sample letter of documentation there that you can just kind of fill in the blanks on as well. The project description, we always suggest that people describe their project in the broadest terms possible, because otherwise you're kind of limiting your options to use that capital funding that you may get. For example, if you are wanting to purchase some patrol vehicles, don't say purchase 2 patrol vehicles. You may get enough money to buy 5. You may get enough money to buy 1. So kind of leave out those kind of numbers and just say to purchase and equip patrol units for the whatever police department or whatever it is. And these other little items are just things that make it easier for us to feed this information into the bill. The bill is basically organized by agency, and then under each agency, there's a whole list of projects that are throughout the state. So, but they get fed into the bill a certain way. So we ask that you start your project description with a lowercase letter. Only proper names are capitalized in the bill. So University of New Mexico, university would be down, lowercase, and New Mexico would be the only thing up in there. Spell everything out in the project description if you can, for example, gymnasium instead of gym, and then leave off any ending punctuation, because that also feeds into your project summary sheet. And so it's kind of set up to not, there's already punctuation in the summary sheet. There's already punctuation in the, when we roll the text out to the bill. This little sidebar mentions that some agencies, and this really isn't true of the local government division, because most local government projects are multi-part and complex in ways that other projects aren't. But for the Department of Transportation and the Environment Department, they're the experts on what they do, and they prefer this boilerplate kind of language that captures everything. So just plan, design, and construct road improvements, plan, design, and construct water system improvements. those things, because there may be all kinds of parts and pieces, behind that they know about that would be hard for all the rest of us to identify. And it also just makes it easier for you if you have a road project or a water project to use that simple language, boilerplate language for that. I mentioned before that the total project cost can and may be different from the amount requested this session. It really is important to provide that total project cost. So if you don't have an ICIP number and you're not pulling that information in from the ICIP, go ahead and provide a budget breakdown there. Legislators are really looking at that. And and there's another question that has been included this year, and it asks if the amount that you have requested this session will fully fund the project, if it's going to fund a phase of the project, or if it will partially fund a phase of the project. So you can imagine that legislators want to see that you're either fully funding a phase of the project or fully funding the project. And if they don't see that total project cost, then it's hard for them to, then they basically know that maybe a real budget breakdown hasn't been provided. The other thing that happens with that is when the governor looks at these projects, and I have seen a lot of projects be vetoed for insufficient funding. So if there's $1 million project and $10,000 is appropriated, then obviously that's not going to, that would be a reasonable thing to veto. I haven't seen too many projects that were overfunded that were vetoed, but when the governor looks at this, I know that she does look at the total project cost. So if your total project cost is higher than the amount that you've requested this session, and you get marginally more that the appropriation amount requested this session, you still have a total project cost that's higher. She's not going to veto, or she hasn't vetoed those projects. So important to think about your phasing, and important to provide that total project cost. I'm going to demonstrate this. This is just, we have these naming conventions so that we can find the same project and pull reports for those things for legislators. The naming convention is, for facilities and equipment, it starts with the location. Then there's that brief description, which is what you would be filling in item 24. And then the project type for title. And that's something that also gets pulled in from the fields you've already provided in the form. The naming convention for schools and roads is that the school or the road name goes first, and then there's the project type for title. So Harvey Road Construct is how those go. But it is a little confusing, so I do want to demonstrate that on the form. Last year, in the last couple of years, we have accepted emailed reauthorization requests. So capital project appropriations from previous years can be reauthorized to extend the time of expenditure, to change the project scope, to clarify, or to change the administering agency. So there are a number of things that can happen to reauthorize these projects. But what we really need is for you to complete the form for that project and get it to your legislator. We had a lot of requests last year that were just, a legislator saying, oh, please reauthorize this project. But we really need that information that's on the form to make sure that we get it right. And I think if anything's harder to amend than the capital bill, it's probably the reauthorization bill, because it comes even, very last minute, right after the capital bill is done. And it really just is impossible to get it to cross over and get consensus. So I've seen people try to amend it, and it's just not really happening. So I do want to point out that we will be circulating a report that shows all the projects that we have for the reauthorization request bill. And the tentative date for that is Monday, March 6th. So if you haven't already heard from us, or ask us if your reauthorization request is in there, take a look at that report and make sure that it's in there and that it's written up appropriately, that whatever change you're requesting has happened. that project. This is just a little summary of the deadlines and reporting dates. You can refer back to, and then I have some project contact information here. And as I mentioned, I do have some other folks on board already. So if you want to contact us, you can just call this main number to the 4600 986-4600 and ask for capital outlay. And we do get busy and get on the phone a lot, but I will have some other folks here to answer the phones and answer questions too. I want to stop this and see if I can get to the oops. Oh, let me see if I can. I'm not finding that now. I'm sorry, I thought I had that set up here. Okay, is that showing?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the opening page of the capital outlay project request site. And you can search here by number. And I'm just gonna let's put that in. It will take you to that project number. This is a project for Doña Ana County. And this shows the project summary sheet. So you'll see all these things. It has the amount requested, the description of the project. It shows where it's located, which county it's in. And most of the time, these things will all be the same in the fiscal agent. Then total amount requested this session. It has total funded to date, which comes from that budget breakdown. Very important because legislators are looking at those things. The total project cost. And then it has a series of questions. And on the form, I'll show you this. They're yes, no questions, but if you check the box, it's a yes. If you leave it blank, then it's a no. So this is the question about fully funded. This one, it will fully fund a phase of the project. Have capital appropriations been made in previous years? Other funding sources, important to list those if you have them, although in many areas, I know that capital project funding may be the main source of funding for these projects, but you can also list if you have part of your capital appropriations, you can list those there. This is a new question that we have this year about the local government planning fund grants. And the local government planning fund was established in 2019. And I think the funding for it was immediately vetoed. And so, and then a couple of years later, I think some of the funding was restored. So most of the time, I think very few people have had an opportunity to use this planning fund and to try to get a grant award. I've also heard from local governments that I think the limit right now is $50,000 in a 2-year period. So it's not a lot of money if you're a small city or a small community try to do a master plan. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is something that I think is important to look at for the future because legislators are looking a lot at planning and means to include planning in this. I might mention right now that we have bounced a few projects that have come in that were strictly for planning because that really is not an eligible capital item. But what we're telling people, and I don't know that there will be junior money this year, but if there is that, excess general fund money that's made available for discretionary use for legislators, that's a good place to go with your planning requests, because that could feed right into these other capital projects that you're doing, and that would be another way to get that other than the planning local government planning fund. And then just the project contact information and a couple of other questions there. So you can also search for these projects by keyword in the title, and I happened to look at Raton this morning because I was looking for one of their projects, and then you just click on the view. It shows this this project in Raton for Lake Maloya Dam, and they did this almost perfectly. It's, I think we probably would lowercase dam, but otherwise they put this project description in so beautifully. This is a common thing that happens with the, oops. Sorry, I lost my spot there. So what happens most commonly with the titles is that people repeat the name of the entity requesting in their description. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the this terms and condition here kind of describes those documentation requirements I was talking about, and a few other things that are included in the bill about 5% of the proceeds should be spent within the first 6 months in order for that state agency to certify the need for the issuance of those bonds. So they read through those, and then this, if you click this little tab down here, it'll take you directly to the form. So I'm going to start one without an ICIP number, and I'm just going to go down here and choose a fiscal agent and show you that a lot of the stuff will fill in, will default that way. Sometimes if you're a nonprofit organization, you can overwrite this entity requesting and fill in your name. If your fiscal agent has agreed to serve as a fiscal agent, but you want your name to show up here as a requesting entity, you can overwrite that. And then, so many of these things fill in the county once you've chosen that fiscal agent. And I'm going to go all the way down here and just submit this and show you what happens when, so all the fields that have not been completed will be highlighted in red for you. If you click that submit and you're missing something, it will show up here, and you can go back and fill in all those fields. I'm going to go back here and fill a project in with an ICIP number. And I think I used this number before. I can't remember which project this was, but I pulled an ICIP project number out of the hat. I'm going to see if this works. So you just click the import ICIP data, and most of this information gets filled in, including the contact. One thing that doesn't get filled in here is the, or is not included in the ICIP for some reason, is the contact title. But I fill in all this contact information. All of this stuff should be coming in for you from the ICIP until you get down to number 11, which is the total amount requested this session. I'm going to just have that in my browser, so I'm going to fill in $1 million here, and you don't need to put any commas, no decimal points. In fact, that kind of that may cause you problems if you put in $signs, decimal points, or commas. So just put in the dollar amount there. Then you do have to choose this. I'm going to say that this is going to fully fund a phase of the project. The project description is already came in from this. This is for the Dan Buzzard Law Library building. So normally I would modify the, or lowercase the start. I'm just going to leave it for our purposes now. So they're designing, removing, and replacing a roof. So on the select the project type for title, I would choose replace, but it could also be construct or something. So that's going to show up in your title. I'm going to show you how that works in a minute. Project subject. So this is a library that would be cultural facilities. And arguably it could be a higher education thing since it's a law school library, but it seems like most libraries go under cultural facilities. So there are a lot of things there. Don't worry too much about nailing this correctly, because this is something that we will look at. And it usually is just something that we use to pull reports and to produce information for legislators. So it's not going to show up on your in your summary anywhere. And then the project will either start this year or next year. So I'm choosing FY24, which would, and generally the severance tax bond proceeds are not available until July 1 of that year. So, and then if your project requires a little more time, you can kick it over to the next year. So these are the questions that if you click the box, it's a yes. I'm going to say yes on this. I don't know that that's true, and I'm just going to leave all the rest as no. So if you're not clicking something there, this information did get pulled in from their ICIP, and it shows that they have this amount as not yet funded. And so if I click this calculate totals tab, it should add everything up here. And unfortunately, I chose $1 million as the total amount requested, which is more than their total project cost. So you definitely don't want to do that, but you know, just for this example, it's fine. So if you had other funding sources, you could list them here. When you come down to this part, this is what you choose one of these things. So I'm choosing that this is a facility, and I'm just going to say, what if I put this in there? And so what happens most commonly is people would repeat this, and this project is from Curry County. So you don't want to repeat Curry County in here, because that's going to be pulled from the that field up above. And then the replace, and actually what we should do here is say roof. So we're providing a brief description of what this project is about. We've already chosen replace as the end of our title, and Curry County will automatically fill in. So you can go back and review all of your information, and then I'm going to go ahead and submit this request. And so our title does come out, Curry County, Dan Buzzard Law Library Roof Replace. And so it is very confusing, because we're asking you to narrow down what you're including in that particular field. I'm going to go back on this one, and please don't do this when you're submitting projects, because if you go back and you change one thing, then you're submitting it gets submitted as a new project. It gets assigned another name or another ID number. So you may have multiple projects that are very similar, and but I did want to show you this. So, and this the same thing if you were purchasing a vehicle. Safety patrol vehicles on there. I go back, submit this one, and then it will say Curry County Safety Patrol vehicles replaced, because we didn't change our title, our project type for title. I'm gonna go back again, and so this is the name of the road, bridge, and so so the for schools and roads, that name comes up first in the title. So we go road, bridge, replace. Similarly, if we did this for a school, put in the name of the elementary school, you know, Alamo LM school, and there are a couple of other functions for. There's a sub request for this one, but. See if we have a school in here. Yeah, Alamo Elementary, and then you get this. What are we doing? There's a drop down that electric vehicle charging stations, and then if it is this is not. I'm going to say this is not a charter school. If it is a charter school, we need to know if it's state chartered or district chartered, because that helps us locate it. If it's just district chartered, we would locate it in the Albuquerque public school district or something. Otherwise, it would be located in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County or wherever it is. And so you see this again comes up with the Alamo Elementary School electric vehicle charging stations replace. So yes, it's fun to play with those, but you don't want to submit too many projects that you have to delete. So I guess that's about all I have to show you. I think most of you are probably familiar with the our website, the legislature's website, on our capital page. And I don't know, are you still seeing this?
Yes.
Okay. Huh. Well, I'm glad they cleared out. We did have a lot of charts posted here from last year, but I think that IT has cleared out my all the charts we had posted. But you can go back. Oh, so we don't have anything for 20. Oh, so these are the this is where the capital outlay requests for each legislator are posted, and this is what these look like. So once they have introduced their capital outlay request, you can see those. I wanted to show you the charts that we do actually, and I think that you are probably familiar with these anyway, but there are quite a variety of charts that we post with information about the this one by sponsor, the projects with the sponsors. That is the report that I was talking about before, and it has funding information, all that good stuff. So we have quite a lot of information on that website, and as the as we start posting new bills and all of that, you can see those things. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry I'm getting a little into the weeds here.
Michelle, there was one question in the chat. I could just open it up with that. Joan Baker asked, can private accredited colleges submit capital outlay requests?
No, not if they're private. Just because of that anti-donation clause. And there is a lot of discussion right now about constitutional amendment that would modify the anti-donation clause. But right now it's just become more and more difficult to get any, even when you have a clear fiscal agent for your project, because those assets must be owned by the state or political subdivision of the state. So if those assets are privately held, capital money couldn't go into those assets.
Could you talk a little bit about nonprofits and using a fiscal sponsor and whether they're eligible to make capital outlay requests?
So that a request usually would come from the local government or whomever had agreed to serve as the fiscal agent for that group. And we ask that that fiscal agent submit the documentation to us at the time that they're submitting their capital project request, because we can still develop that request and submit it, but we usually notify legislators that this documentation hasn't been provided, because they need to know that that project probably won't go through. That funding, once it gets to the Board of Finance and the Department of Finance and Administration, that funding won't be released unless that that connection is made with that fiscal agent. And so if you're requesting funding for a building, that fiscal agent must own the building and agree to maintain it. And I know there are, Bernalillo County is one county that produces a resolution saying, and they list all their capital projects, and they also list all the nonprofit groups that they have agreed to serve as the fiscal agent for, and list those projects. but it still is very difficult, even if they're buying equipment for an organization. They're just, it seems like there are more and more difficulties with that. I know Bernalillo County used to purchase vehicles for senior transportation programs or veterans programs in different areas of the state. And but now, there's a lot of liability issues that arise with that if you have someone else operating those vehicles. And so I just seen more and more over the last few years that these projects just get really hung up with the Board of Finance that way. So it has to be very clear. Now, Bernalillo County has been very successful with some of their, the nonprofits that they've been working with for quite some time, but there are procurement issues for them too. So it's quite a process. It just adds a lot of hoops for people to jump through.
Yes, I have a question. I'm not listed on the fiscal agents, Velarde Mutual Domestic Water Association. I'm not on there. I can't drop that pop down, and there's nothing there.
Oh, okay. Can you send me what's the name of the organization?
It's the Velarde Mutual Domestic Water Consumers Association.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. It sounds like that's probably that you're probably in our table. It just hasn't been activated, and it usually takes. I have to. Some of the information is stored on a server that I don't have access to, so I can activate it in my table, but then I have to get the IT basically to activate it in their table, which usually takes overnight. So I'll look for it, and if you can send me an email just so that I have a way to get back to you if I don't find it, and if we have to go to DFA and get an entity code or something.
Yeah, I received funding a couple years ago, so
okay.
I thought it would be there. Yeah,
but, okay. I bet it's there. And
yeah, what is your email? Because I'm on the phone. I'm not on the Zoom call.
Oh, okay. It's Michelle, Michelle dot Jaschke, Jaschke at nmlegis.gov.
At nmlegis.gov?
nmlegis, LAGIS.gov, G-O-V.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. And I imagine that it's there and just hasn't been activated as we've been trying to, sort out all the names, the correct names for these organizations and get them on the right list.
Okay. And as soon as I'll email you, and if it's up, I'll go and fill out the application.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Michelle. This is Jake with the Village of Cuesta. Is there a maximum number of projects that you can submit?
There is not. Although I know that legislators, I think it's different in every area. And every legislator is different too. Sometimes they'll know exactly how many requests that they're going to take or sponsor, but there really is no limit that way. And I would try to not overwhelm them with too many requests and try to focus on the ones that you really want, because the other thing that can happen is that they split funding between those projects and you don't get enough funding to complete one. So I would try to prioritize and depending on your needs, try to keep it to something that your legislators can deal with. And I know your legislators, I think, get a lot of requests because of all the areas that they serve. So
thank you.
Michelle, I was going to ask a question. I don't believe that the amounts that you talked about, how much per senator, how much per representative have been decided at this point, but can you give the audience just like an example of what they were last year? For those who might be new to the process, to think about, okay, this senator is getting X number of dollars and they might be receiving 20 requests or something like that. So just to give everyone an example of, you know, what is really available and how to kind of target their requests a little better.
Yeah, and I can just give you kind of a ballpark figure, and I have heard variously that the amount will be similar to what it was last year. And I think senators got a little over 3 million and representatives got a little under 2 million. So, and that's you know, that's quite a lot of money compared to what has happened in some prior years. But it had been pretty, it was fairly consistent with what had happened the last couple of years. So, and then of course, the governor gets that, you know, that consolidated amount of that. And oh, I lost my train of thought. I did have another something I was going to mention in that regard.
And so this year, I remember last year there was quite a bit of confusion because I think you had to specifically state on the form if you wanted the request to go to the governor's office. And you know, I think there was some confusion about, well, we asked the governor's office for that, but we didn't ask our legislators. I think what I'm hearing from you is this year it's just one form and it's not parsed out that way.
Right, right. And actually it was that way last year, but there was so much confusion from the year before because the governor had a separate website. So I'm really happy that we have combined all of that. All of the requests are coming through our website. And so the governor gets the same project numbers and the same requests that legislators are getting. And hopefully they're all getting them earlier this year and can kind of look at putting all that funding together that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What other questions do we have? It looks like a question from Taos Pueblo.
Yes, good morning. This is Sean Duran, and I'm just wondering on the web project site, when you're uploading it, what if you make a mistake and you already send it?
At this point, we are still able to, we still have enough time to go in. And so we can correct anything on our side. So we pull all these projects into our database, and then we make changes to the language so that it conforms to the bond disbursement language and can go into the bill. So we're going to make some changes anyway. But if you want this change to be reflected on your summary sheet, you can either just strike through and write that and make that change yourself. If it's something major budget wise, we can go in and change that while we have time now. And the issue is that we have to go into a bunch of different tables on the website to make those changes. But if it's something fairly simple, we can make that change for you and just send us an email requesting that change. And we also like to document those because we don't want to go in and change people's information without a real request to do that. And if you need to delete a project, you can just delete a project and start over, because you see it's pretty simple and fast process to do that. But if you want to delete a project, just send us an email and say, please delete this project. And
Okay, thank you. So it would it be to you, Michelle, that we would send that request for any changes that if we made a mistake?
yes, you can send it to me, or I think Sheila Kelleher is also listed on there.
Okay.
And either one of us, but
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it looks like there's an additional question in the chat. Do you have contact information for the governor's office to discuss proposed projects?
you know, I don't. I I know I'm not sure who they will have this year. That I think they had Diego Arancon was their contact last year, but I would just call their front desk and ask them. But usually when I'm dealing with the governor's office, and I go through the Capital Outlay Bureau at the Department of Finance and Administration, and they have told me that they're also collecting the project summary sheets. And so you could call the Capital Outlay Bureau at DFA and just ask who to talk to in the governor's office, or call the governor's office and ask them. But they undoubtedly will have staff dedicated to that. So,
So just ask them who's assigned to capital outlay for the session would
Yeah.
be, okay. What other questions for Michelle? Okay, in the chat, our governing body adopted a resolution for our legislative priorities. Who do we send the resolution to?
it's really helpful for us to have those because then we can refer back, and if the legislator asks us, we can get that to them. But I would make sure that you get that to the legislators in your area, and because that really can help them to know what your priorities are. So I would definitely get that to your legislators in your district.
What other questions do we have? So I think we can talk for a minute about the assistance we're providing if anyone needs help filling out their capital outlay requests. Do you want to talk about that, Felicity?
Yeah, I am available to assist anyone in filling out your capital outlay request, and I'll put my contact information in the chat. So please feel free to reach out if you'd like that.
And I think what typically happens as everyone can anticipate is that, there's a lot of waiting until the last minute, right? And then next week, on Wednesday and Thursday, it gets really crazy with people needing help with their requests. So because we have limited staff, if you would please just, go in and look at the form now, see it. We do have a number of local governments in particular that have already lined up some time with Felicity to fill out the requests. But if you could kind of go in and if you're planning to do it on your own, just make sure you don't need any assistance. And then, maybe set up an appointment in advance if you can. Obviously, we'll be here for anything last minute that you need. But I just know those last couple of days get a little crazy, and they probably get a little crazy on your end too, Michelle.
Yes, they do.
Calling. So I guess the more we can get in front of it, the better. But we are here to help you, and we can also help you once you get into the session with, kind of tracking. There's a number of tables and things that Michelle was showing, as we get into the process of when the bill's being put together, we can help you find things on the website also, and even kind of help with the communication sometimes if that's needed. So just let us know what you need both before and during the session. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Everyone's so quiet.
Yeah. I put them to sleep with this lengthy demonstration.
Well, it was very thorough, and I don't know, that was very helpful for me as well, actually, to go over all the finer points. And I think what I really appreciated was the information about the kind of back of house side of the process, when the forms the legislators fill out, when those things are due, we don't always see that on this side. So it's really good to see what happens on the other side. I know in past years, we've submitted a request from North Central, and we've submitted them to certain legislators, and then different legislators end up actually sponsoring them because, our legislators talk to each other and they decide, kind of as a group, how they're going to divide up the dollars that they have. So it is interesting. There is a lot that goes on the other side of the fence. And so I really appreciate that you shared all that with us, Michelle, and pulled up some slides to show that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me this morning. I really do like to get this information out there for everyone. So
yeah, that's great. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So just a big thank you. Is there anything else we need to cover?
we're available here to answer questions as well. So give us a call if you need us, and I will look into that water association and try to get that activated.
And
Thank you.
we will post the recording of this and the presentation on the news section of our website. So you can just get on there. We'll probably have that up, if not later today, tomorrow morning. And just want to say thank you so much to Michelle. We really appreciate you and thank you for really walking us through that step by step and getting us all ready for submitting capital outlay.
Thank you. And good luck to everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Thanks, everyone.